Hey there, hunters. Welcome back to the Gunners Guild. Continuing on with the weapon tier list here in Remnant 2, today we're going to talk about the long guns. For a reminder, we're going to be judging these guns based on their apocalypse capabilities, which obviously means their damage, but also their burst and sustain, as well as synergies with mods and mutators, and some personal preferences. If you missed part 1 on the handguns, feel free to watch that. Before or after, doesn't really matter. But anyway, this is just going to be kind of long, so let's just get into this. Starting alphabetically, and surely going to mess that up again, but fitting that we start with Alpha and Omega. This is a fusion rifle for the long gun slot, similar to the bolt driver from the handgun slot. Alpha Omega has a unique feature in hitting enemies with its bolt increases its rate of fire and reducing its charge time, stacking up to 50%, which is kind of crazy. Once you get this gun rolling, it can dish out some pretty respectable damage, both in a burst of one clip as well as kind of sustained with the reloads, because it's not that bad. That being said, it's a shame that the gun only really shines when you have the supercharger and archer's crest ring equipped, like the bolt gun, because without the reduced charge time, the DPS is really not anything to write home about. The other unique parts of Alpha and Omega is the mod, Beta Ray, which is not too shabby. It fires 3 beacons which can stack on the same target, and when you reload or swap the weapon, which is the real good part, the beacons explode for a decent amount of damage if you invest in the mod damage side. Enemies killed with the Beta Ray will also refund some ammo and some mod power, allowing you to sustain the weapon much more easily. So in general, Alpha Omega has 2 very functional parts, but unfortunately, they're entirely separate. The gun and the mod scale entirely different, and that's like the big downside here in Remnant, because that's very common. And they actually have no synergy, unfortunately. And this makes the gun only okay in a range build because it lacks the ammo boosting mods like corrosive rounds. And in a mod-based build, the Beta Rays are actually fantastic, but the actual gun becomes awful with no charge speed investment. That all being said, we are kind of split on the votes due to the powerhouse nature it wields in a mod builds, and it's split between like an A and a C tier, so we're going to average it out to a B tier, which honestly I think is pretty fair. Next up is Aphelion. Like Starshot, Aphelion may be a controversial decision. Everyone knows Aphelion's Black Hole mod is one of the best and strongest damaging mods around. It scales very well with mod, fire, and burning damage, covering an absurd area effect, and it is kind of a bread and butter mod for a lot of mod builds. But I'm not really convinced in the powers of most damaging mods since mod generation is entirely out of whack right now. But regardless, Black Hole is great, we all know it. What's not great about Aphelion is the actual blade beam that Aphelion shoots. Projectile weapons are always cumbersome to wield because you have to predict enemy movements and kind of land those weak spots. And for whatever reason, man, these blades just do not want to hit weak spots, and I just can't reliably deal damage with this thing. The blades are also kind of slow, which doesn't help, and they really get eaten by terrain and obstacles a lot, unlike other beams such as World's Edge, which kind of just passes through everything. And the damage isn't anything special here either. The only benefit that the blade really has is that it can pierce through enemies, which can be pretty decent. Now overall, the Aphelion is clearly designed to be a mod-based weapon, and it does that job well. But like most weapons that have a fixed damage mod, it's a shame that the weapon can't scale with the mod via some other typing of something like the blade's dealt fire damage or something. Because for mod builds, it makes the weapon shooting actually lacking severely. And I feel like it's an easy fix to remedy this. And in the end, we're going to be giving Aphelion a B tier ranking as well. And for the record, if we do get updates and changes to the mod damages and mod generation stuff, we will be re-looking back into most of these boss weapons. And then we're going to have the AS-10 Bulldog, the auto shotgun that the Challenger starts with. Now, as you all should know, I have a soft spot for shotguns. And the Bulldog is a very nice shotgun, and look, I know we have a lot of different shotguns, but I feel like each one actually has a unique job, Bulldog included. And what the Bulldog really excels at is crowd control and trash clear. The high damage and high fire rate makes it perfect for running and gunning, and pretty much mowing down everything on your way. Compared to something like Spore Bloom, which has to reload after every shot, missing is really bad there, and your standard shotgun, which has a smaller clip size and a longer reload, the Bulldog fits like right in the middle of those two, dealing enough damage to 1 or 2 tap most non-elite enemies and just clear rooms on a single drum. And the Bulldog obviously does have its downsides, being that the range is not any better than any other shotgun, sitting at 10 meters, and it has lower damage compared to other shotguns, so it's really not optimal for bossing by any means. But the Bulldog does have a good amount of flexibility with the open mod slot, and does function well in all forms of content in the game, even mod generation. But there are unfortunately some more specialized options for min-maxing. So, I mean, I'm probably going to give Bulldog an A tier. It is pretty great, it's not perfect or anything. But again, I have a bias towards shotguns, so take that for what you will. Following up on the Bulldog is the Black Maw, the assault rifle, and this is one of the most average long guns as far as I can see. This is basically the repeater pistol of long guns. The stats on it are very baseline, and unfortunately, like the repeater pistol, it doesn't stand out in any significant way. There are a lot of automatic weapons in the long gun slot, which all have to compete for that spot, and unlike shotguns, which are all kind of a little bit different, automatic weapons all kind of perform the same. And while the Black Maw technically has higher damage per second compared to something like the Chicago Typewriter, the smaller clip size means it's going to have to reload way more frequently, which kind of kills its sustained DPS. Although it still performs well in room-to-room clearing when you have time to reload between each group of enemies, there's just not much to say on this one, to be honest. Like, that's just it. And again, we have a lot of votes all in the ranges from D tier to S tier, so unfortunately, I'm gonna have to settle on like C tier for this one. Like, it's not terrible, but I feel like it's not very good for B tier either. And you'll kind of see why as we continue to highlight some other weapons as we continue on, so just kind of keep this in mind. Oh hey look, Chicago Typewriter's up next, how convenient. Okay, so obviously we have to directly compare this to Black Maw as they're both automatic long guns. And comparing the two, the Black Maw has lower rate of fire, with higher damage per bullet, slightly more range than the Chicago Typewriter, but I mean, slightly. But what the Typewriter has over the Black Maw is more than makes up for it. To start, the Typewriter has a much larger drum with 80 rounds compared to Black Maw's 38. And despite the slower reload, you have to reload effectively less by comparison and spend less time because the Black Maw just, dumps through clips really fast. And what this does, along with the increased rate of fire, is kind of allow you to chip away enemies in a more precise manner and gives the player more control over the damage per bullet to deal with trash mobs more effectively, at least that's in my opinion. And speaking of precision, the other benefit the Typewriter has over the Black Maw is that rather than increase in recoil as you hold down the trigger, making it perform more inaccurately, it inverses this and gets more precise as you hold down the trigger, turning it into a laser, which allows you to also forego investing in things like recoil and spread reduction, as it's kind of built in. And while only a slight bonus, the Chicago Typewriter has a 5% increase in weak spot damage compared to the Black Maw. And honestly, I don't really see what the Black Maw does that the Typewriter doesn't do better, especially for fishing for crits. And because of this, I have to place this higher than Black Maw, so we're going to be putting this in A tier. I really like the Chicago Typewriter in this game. It's an excellent automatic weapon, probably the best one. Next up, we have the Coach Gun. This is my baby. If you guys didn't know, back in the Subject 2923 DLC of Remnant 1, I did help adjust the stats of this gun and I made it. This is my baby. And I love the over-under shotguns. Here in Remnant 2, the Coach Gun is slightly different in that it no longer fires pellets, but instead slugs, which makes it function more like a two-shot sniper with some random spread, which we'll get to in a moment. The Coach Gun has great damage, good stagger, and a fast reload despite it needing to constantly reload. Coach Gun also plays very well with large amounts of mutators like Bandit, Extender, and even Slayer if you want to. I really like the Coach Gun because it scales its damage very well with all sorts of stats, not just direct damage, like reload speed and even fire rate helps push the gun even further, especially when you're running Bandit. It also makes for a great weapon to use on mod generation builds thanks to its high base damage, giving meaty chunks of mod power per hit. And now there is specifically one big issue I have with the Coach Gun, and that is the inconsistency, which I don't understand how or why. This gun always shoots in the dead center of its reticle, which makes me wonder why there even is a spread reticle like a shotgun, right? But for whatever reason, it seems to miss enemies or pass right through them sometimes, as if the slug is hitting elsewhere in the reticle, but visually it's not changing, like if that makes sense. I don't know what is going on with it, but missing shots in a low clip weapon feels really bad, and for some reason the Coach Gun is just feeling inconsistent. I still love the Coach Gun, and pretty much everyone I've talked to has ranked it A or S tier, and while I would personally love to give it an S rank, that weird inconsistency makes me put it in an A tier, and I hope we figure out what's going on with this thing. And then we have the Crescent Moon next, and I mean, can I just put an S tier on this and move on? We all know it's the strongest weapon in the game, right? Bugs aside. While the base stats of the bow are lower than other bows, the mod gives you more than double damage, which is kind of absurd. And while we have a lot of bug mod generation items that allow us to sustain the Crescent Moon mod basically indefinitely, which we shouldn't, I believe that even once all that stuff gets ironed out and fixed, it's still going to be the best weapon in the game, assuming you can maintain the precision shots. Like, I'm playing with it with no bugged items or anything, and it still performs amazingly. I mean, really, do I have to talk about it more? I'm going to move on. It's S tier across the board with votes anyways. It's just the best weapon. Next in line is the crossbow, and what a disparity between these two is. I don't actually see any redeemable quality to the crossbow. Just looking at its stats, it's worse than the sniper in basically all aspects. plus it's a projectile weapon, which is already inconsistent by comparison. The crossbow does have the added perk of being silent, so you can just shoot enemies without immediately alerting everything nearby, but that quality hardly sees any use, and there's really not very many items to take advantage of stealth in Remnant, so it kind of feels wasted. Plus, if you want to be quiet, bows also satisfy this and kind of deal more damage, so I really don't see a reason to use the crossbow over like a regular bow or a sniper rifle. There are just far better weapons that satisfy the same job. Now, as a side tangent, what would you guys want to do for the crossbow to make it like redeemable? I was thinking of giving the crossbow like the ability to apply bleed on hit like Merciless. That would be enough. Or if it fired a large bolt with a slower reload, but with much higher damage and stagger, kind of like a little skewer from Remnant 1. Anyway, let me know your thoughts, but for now, it's going all the way down to the basement. Now going all the way back up, we have Deceit, which is a very unique gun. Deceit is a fusion rifle, so it charges to fire and it can be held and just, constantly go. And Deceit fires 2 pulses in a straight line that are incapable of dealing weak spot damage, but it does have very high base damage and higher crit than any other weapon to make up for it. And Deceit is already the best body shot weapon in the game just because of this natural high damage and crit, but where Deceit truly shines is with its mod Ouroboros. And what this mod does is apply a ring of swords around the user that can be fired off with melee swings, and whenever you hit a target with the swords, it gives you a few seconds of weak spot damage, anywhere. So you turn this gun from great to absolutely amazing with its mod, allowing for huge damage. The mod itself may feel kind of clunky to use since you have to constantly cycle between melee and shooting, but the damage more than makes up for it. And the mod also recharges very fast, and it's often usable again just after dumping one clip of Deceit into an enemy. And this is one of the good cases where the boss mods are very synergistic with the actual weapon fire and do nothing but improve it. When wielded in the proper hands, Deceit becomes one of the strongest weapons in the game, and easily the strongest weapon in the game once you're fighting a boss without any actual weak spots, as seldom as that is. And while I know a majority of the community doesn't actually appreciate Deceit, it truly is a monster of a weapon and deserves a spot in S tier with the Crescent Moon. Next up, my old reliable, the Scattergun, but I'm just going to call it the shotgun. The shotgun is the bread and butter damage dealer. It punches holes in pretty much anything and everything. It has a moderate clip size, good fire rate, and obviously like all shotguns, it's brought down by its spread and lack of range, but also this one particularly has kind of a long reload. But most of those are pretty easy to compensate. While the reload is pretty bad, like the revolver, you can cancel it early in a pinch, which definitely does help its usability. The shotgun is probably one of the most versatile weapons in Remnant, being able to function in various amounts of range builds and setups, crit stacking or not, but also in shotgun swapper setups or provisioner rings or gunfire lanyard. It also performs great in mod power builds due to the high base damage and fire rate. It just generates the most amount of mod power out of any weapon with a free slot. And being that it does have that open slot, it becomes incredibly flexible with damage mods, utility mods, or MO mods. Really, sky's the limit here. The only thing you really have to manage is the range, as recoil can be taken care of with a concoction, and the gun is just so solid that I really can't say enough good things about it. Every vote that came into the shotgun has been an S tier, which is understandable. It's just got everything going for it with only some very minor downsides. Alright, up next we have the Huntsmaster. Now, through all the playtests, I've always said that the Huntsmaster was the best feeling gun in the game. It's amazingly consistent with its damage, recoil, rate of fire, and reload speeds. The range is amazing, it has a scope, it's really just great on all fronts. It clears through packs of enemies very easily, it can take down elites very well with its strong hits and high fire rate. Really, the only downside to the Huntsmaster is that, shot for shot, the damage is significantly less than something like Coach Gun, where you look at it, Coach Gun can one-tap most enemies, and the Huntsmaster would kind of need a two-tap, so because of that, Huntsmaster can usually get like one more kill per enemy per clip, but it also has a slower reload speed, which makes it good, but not better than the Coach Gun. Huntsmaster is perfect for those who like DMRs and like precision shooting, with flexibility to miss the shot, unlike the Sniper. It's always been a fan favorite gun for good reason, and the only downside I can really see for the Huntsmaster is strictly for bossing, because the damage isn't terribly great. So I want to give this a B tier, and most people seem to think it's an A tier. Like, it's a very good gun, so I'm going to side with everyone else and put it in A. It's good, but I don't think the damage is good enough for bossing. Boss weapon time with Merciless. It's actually quite a unique gun on all fronts, and let's start with the standard gun portion though. Merciless at its core is a weaker Black Maw assault rifle. It's an automatic weapon with low damage per shot, but a good clip size and a good rate of fire. This gun shoots projectile darts though, it's not hit scan bullets, so innately it's going to have more of an accuracy issue compared to some other weapons. But to make up for that, Merciless can apply bleed on it while you hold down the trigger and keep shooting. Merciless is the only long gun in the game with the actual ability to apply statuses on just the base trigger fire, and you know how much we like bleed. However, the low damage of the bleed doesn't really make up for the also low damage of the darts, so the gun itself is fairly weak. On the other side of the gun though, we have the mod Bloodline. This mod has the highest damage per mod power cost potential, which makes it very spammable and very good at spamming. Bloodline also has an extra 25% crit damage, so naturally we scale this gun with crit stacking. However, Bloodline has a weird habit of just not hitting what it's aimed at. Similar to the Coach gun, but a little bit more severe. It just doesn't really land where it really feels like it should. And because the gun wants to scale off crit and bleeding, we kind of have a problem with it. Scaling the range side is kind of fine, it does moderate damage, but it's not better at anything than any other automatic weapon since it can't really use ammo mods. But when you scale the mod side and you have to scale the crit, which kind of ends up being the same gear as like a ranged build. So in the end, while the Bloodline can get pretty meaty and the sustain is very good, it just ends up feeling like a worse sniper rifle in my opinion. It feels weird to scale its mod since it kind of like in the end it's just another gun. It's not bad, it just kind of feels like a sniper rifle with more steps and it's kind of more clunky, and has issues with the mod not registering sometimes. And again, the gun has two pretty good sides, but with very little synergy between the normal fire and the mod. Not no synergy, because bleed does work for both, but that's it. And I know I kind of crapped all over Merciless, but it's not terrible. We still opted to put it in B tier because it's good, but only half of it is good at a time. And then we have Nightfall, and oh how the mighty have fallen. Nightfall was once the best weapon in the game, and it still may be, but because of a bug with Faerun's Ring allowing mod generation to go through active mods, which will let you sustain the mod forever, so we're not going to consider that for now, but we're going to continue on. Nightfall is a semi-automatic rifle, which has honestly got pretty mediocre stats by default, nothing special, but the damage per shot is pretty nice. What makes Nightfall crazy is the mod Nightwalker, which puts you in the Shadow Realm for 10 seconds. During this time you have a fully automatic gun with infinite ammo, 10% life leech, which is insane, and it will leave a little shadow double of yourself, making enemies less effective at attacking you because they're basically going to be attacking a space where you were half a second ago, so avoiding hits is so much easier. Even without bugs to sustain the mod indefinitely, it is a very powerful mod, and not all that hard to have significant uptime on. While Nightfall had been nerfed to reduce its rate of fire, it's still an absolute beast of a weapon. Nightfall is a jack-of-all-trades gun even now because it bolsters your survivability with the leech and the extra little evading, as well as your damage, and really kind of works on about any build. And while of course you don't want mod power, mod generation is actually very helpful to sustain this thing. And like I mentioned before, it's just really nice when a weapon with a forced mod actually has a very synergistic mod that helps the weapon be complete. So yeah, like I want Merciless to be S tier, but after the nerfs, everyone seems to agree that it is a high A tier weapon. Still very, very powerful. Continuing on, we have another blast from the past, the Plasma Cutter, a very overpowered weapon in Remnant 1. The Plasma Cutter makes its return in Remnant 2, although slightly different. One of the main changes for this gun is that rather than apply an invisible debuff on an enemy to ramp its damage like it does in Remnant 1, in Remnant 2, the damage buildup is attached to the gun, so you can actually switch targets and keep ramping up your damage as long as you're holding down the trigger, which makes it much better for ad clear here in Remnant 2. Also new to this gun is the heat buildup, which prevents you from holding the trigger down indefinitely. You can run through 70% of its clip without overheating, and if you run the microcompressor, you can dump the whole mag and not ever overheat. But be careful when using things like the microcompressor and the constant variable ring, which increases the damage with high heat, because the microcompressor makes it take a lot longer to build up enough heat to actually see bonuses off the constant variable ring, so I'd personally just run one or the other. Anyway, back to Plasma Cutter. Largely works the same as before, you're still needing to hold down the laser as much as possible to keep its damage ramped up and to make the most out of it, which can be difficult in some boss fights, but not so bad that it's unusable in them. It just requires a little bit more skill to maintain it. Another cool part about the Plasma Cutter is the fixed mod it has on now. Heatsink will automatically discharge your heat and refill all your ammo like another ammo buff mod, as well as give you a 20-second buff that will reduce your heat buildup by 50% and increase your ramp damage from 2 times to 3 times, so it's pretty much a good 50% damage boost, which ain't too shabby. While the description says it auto overheats when it's done, it really doesn't, so you don't have to worry about that 5-second overheat animation. Plasma Cutter is very interesting to play with as you can actually shuffle around with heat and ramp up times, which is its own little mini game. However, because it has these little mechanics you have to deal with, I kind of wish the base damage was just a little bit higher to compensate, because even with the mod active, Plasma Cutter hits about 4k DPS on a target dummy, whereas other ranged weapons with similar setups can hit about high 5-6k DPS. It's largely due to the Plasma Cutter having that 75% weak spot modifier, so it's not particularly good there, Had it been up to like 100%, I think the plasma cutter would be much better off, but it's not a bad gun by any means. And it does have a nice fixed mod going for it. It just needs a little bit more love in my opinion. Overall, we're going to give this a B tier. I thought it deserved to be a little bit lower, but a lot of people love this gun. I just don't think it's great in a lot of boss fights, while the trash clear is pretty solid. Up next, we have the Pulse Rifle, the Undying King's Rifle without the attached mod. Pulse Rifle shoots a very fast burst of 3 rounds with a very generous rate of fire and reload speed. It just kind of feels fast all around, especially when you have like lightning ammo, it's kind of crazy. The Pulse Rifle also has a few small benefits that really prop this gun up. First being that it has a 10% base crit chance that pretty much most automatic weapons typically have, and this is not automatic. And because the base crit chance and the high fire rate, it becomes a really good carrier of the Momentum mutator, which is easily the best mutator in the game. It also comes with 7 spare clips of ammo, which again is very generous, and has a nice 22 meter range, which is further than all the other automatic weapons, even though again it's not automatic. And lastly, it has a 105% weak spot damage modifier, which is just a nice little icing on the cake. And being that it has an open mod slot, you're free to use whatever style of build you want with this thing, though of course MO mods kind of make this thing shred. Overflow and corrosive rounds especially. The Pulse Rifle is an all-around great gun which is comfortable at both trash clear and bossing, with honestly no real downsides. I guess the only thing that could be keeping the Pulse Rifle out of S tier is that the damage is great, but just not quite as powerful as some of the other S tier guns. But by no means does that make it a bad gun at all. Typically S tiers are just monstrous at bossing, and I mean it's fine to do everything great and nothing the best. So with that, we're going to leave the Plasma Cutter in high A tier. Following up the Pulse Rifle, we have the Repulsor, another returned weapon from Remnant 1. Repulsor also has kind of been an odd one. It's a semi-automatic shotgun with a wide spread, but it does reduce its spread as you hold down the aim down sights key. Each shot you make also increases its spread, so unfortunately shooting it as fast as you can makes the spread really bad, and even with a lot of spread reduction, it still gets pretty inconsistent as you shoot, which is a shame. It has a little bit more range than other shotguns, which is always appreciated, but it has an abysmal reload speed that just kind of makes you want to cry. It dumps its magazine very fast, so you end up spending a lot of time in that reload animation. And while it kind of all sounds like it's bad from the get-go, it's actually a really strong shotgun. The rate of fire and the damage make its short-term bursts better than the scatter gun, but once you hit that first reload, it's really going to fall off. So if you can makeshift some alternative means of reloading, such as like Gunslinger Prime Perk or Gunfire Lanyard or Provisioner's Ring, or like whatever, it becomes much more consistent and stronger because you're not wasting 5 seconds every 5 seconds because of that reload. Repulsor also comes with the mod Banish, which is a very versatile mod. Just shooting about any non-boss entity, including players, elites, and mini-bosses, will banish them for 4 seconds, removing them from the world and preventing them from moving or taking damage, so it can be used to save an ally or stop an enemy. When a creature returns from banishment, it comes with a debuff for 8 seconds that makes the Repulsor deal 1.5 times damage to the target, and this can be applied to bosses, which makes the Repulsor excellent in pretty much all fights and encounters. Really, the Repulsor's only fault is with its reload time and kind of its total ammo capacity, which, while good for a shotgun, still gets burned through very fast to its high rate of fire. I guess that's kind of good and bad. So the rank we're going to bestow on the Repulsor is a B tier. I kind of want it to be higher because I love shotguns. I just feel it's a little bit too clunky to swap between the mod and the shooting so often to maintain its damage. Moving on, next we have the Royal Hunting Bow. Look, I know that the Crescent Moon casts a huge shadow over this bow, but trust me, the bow is good enough, and with it being the only bow with an open mod slot, it at least can take advantage of elemental weaknesses. And once those mod generation bugs get fixed, I feel like the Royal Hunting Bow will compete on a pretty level playing field with the Crescent Moon. For reference, the Royal Hunting Bow has 5% more base crit, 45% more weak spot damage, and 20% more stagger over the Crescent Moon. Of course, while Crescent Moon has its mod active, it gets more than double its damage, so that's no real competition, but while the mod is not active, Royal Hunting Bow is still kinda crushing Crescent Moon. Plus, Royal Hunting Bow can also run overflow or corrosive rounds, which is a nice boost to its damage, and it makes the bow a lot more flexible in the future for whatever other mods or DLC items we may get. While the bow seems simple and ordinary on paper, I believe that becomes its biggest strength. The Royal Hunting Bow is easily capable of quickly one-tapping trash enemies and plowing through zones, as well as being more than capable enough of dealing with bosses all on its own. Though I think Royal Hunting Bow is also going to have to sit in B tier, because it's just not as good as other bow options right now. It may trade places in the future, but we're going to have to see. Now following up, we have the Sagittarius, our last bow. Spiked, I don't believe you. This is not A tier, is it? I'm gonna have to go do some checking on this. Alright, so I had to do some testing with Sagittarius because typically I just use this with a mod since it has that fixed mod, but we're gonna get to that in a second. The main reason why Sagittarius is so highly regarded by like Spiked and Bolt Jameson is because the high base damage, which gets amplified greatly on the precision hits that bows have. The stats are otherwise the same compared to the Royal Hunting Bow, but the base power does not lie. Even when fully ignoring your fixed mod, Sagittarius does the same amount of damage and overall work that a Royal Hunting Bow does, but without needing to rely on any mod uptime. So yeah, after playing with it, I'm gonna have to give it to the bow. It's good. But let's talk about the bad side. Sagittarius has its fixed mod, Starfall, and I get so heated when I think about this mod. I want to love it, I really do. It's cool looking, it costs very little mod power, and it just rains down stars in an AoE. It's all cool. However, the mod is so damn awful. There are stars that fall hit randomly, and a lot of the time when you shoot it, they just don't hit anything because the blast radius is so tiny. You basically have to land on the enemy for it to deal any damage. And neither the radius of the portal nor the blast radius of the stars scale with amplitude or resonance, which is a dang shame. And even when the star shots hit, the damage is very weak on them. Like, you can scale it with explosive damage and mod damage, which is cool, but unless the target you shoot is large and literally not moving, it's rare that you'll get more than like 2 or 3 hits with Starfall. Also, the duration of 6 seconds cannot be increased with mod duration, so like nothing you can do with mod stuff can play with it, just the damage, which starts at 150 damage per impact, which is super low. And again, I like the mod on paper, I just think it needs some love, like increase the blast radius of the Starfalls, it would just save the mod alone, and then let it scale with things like radius and duration, and maybe a little bit more damage. But for now though, if we're up to me, I would put Sagittarius in C tier because the mod is bad and it frustrates me. But Bolt convinced me it deserves a higher tier because the base damage on a pure range build alone is really strong, so fine, it goes in A tier. I disagree, but A tier it is. Shame on the mod side though, it's so bad. Next is another goofy weapon, Savior. Another gun that I really wanted to love because it's basically a bow gun, if you're familiar with Monster Hunter, so it's like made for me. I say bow gun because it is a gun, but it shoots like a bow here in Remnant, where you have to hold down the trigger and land precision charges for perfect damage. Because of the charge mechanic, you're basically forced into running like Supercharger Mutator as bows would, because the charge time really hurts your overall DPS, and the base damage of the gun isn't bad when you land those perfect precision shots. It has really respectable DPS, especially with Supercharger on, but again, that is only if you're landing those perfect precision shots. Where the gun starts to falter though is with its first reload. Because unlike bows, who have very consistent DPS as they immediately fire and draw a new arrow, Savior has to reload every 6 shots, and that reload is rough. Like Repulsor, it's like a 5-second reload, and then you have to start charging again. And because the gun functions exactly like a bow, you kind of have to compare it to bows. Despite having the 6 round in its chamber, it really doesn't shoot any faster than a bow does since they have the same charge time, and you have to go through that every single shot anyway. So really, any reload time is just a damper on the gun. Savior also comes attached with a mod called Shatterstar, which when active will act kind of like Hotshot, granting you a free reload and a burning dot on hit, as well as a trigger when weak spot hits and kills to automatically cause the fragments to hit nearby enemies, dealing 30% of the damage and applying burning to them as well. The dot on this burn is actually really bad, pretty much like all dots in the game. It does 750 damage over 10 seconds, so like 75 DPS on top, which if you're doing like 2000 damage per second, that is a 4-second damage boost, which is awful. Because even Hotshot applies a similar dot, but also grants 15% range damage. The shatter part is to clear ads, and it is the best feature of the gun, which does let it clear packs of enemies pretty well. But of course, that's only when the mod is active, and personally, I have no issues clearing packs of enemies with my sidearms like Meridian, Enigma, and the SMG. The mod isn't really helping me at all, it's not doing anything for bosses or elites, and even if it did, bosses have elemental resist and some fire res with those that do have it, so that would kind of stop it hard in its tracks anyways. And like I said, I really want to like this weapon, especially for being a reward for veteran hardcore, but I just don't see it doing anything better than any other bow. Personally, if I could change the gun, I would increase the reload speed obviously, and change the mod to either just have a much stronger burn dot, like 2500 damage over 20 seconds, which would make it similar to DPS wise with Hotshot, which also gives you 15% damage, or change the mod to hold 6 charges, same as the clip, and change the fire mode from a bow to a shotgun while the mod's active, so you can shoot like big spread of fiery shrapnel that would apply burn, and also bounce to nearby enemies on weak spot hits and kills. This way it retains much of the same identity, but also the mod could be used more effectively on elites and bosses to dump big shotgun shells in them. Have you guys realized I like shotguns? I really do. Okay, we talked a lot about Savior. Unfortunately, I have to place this one in C tier because while it is decently strong, it kind of has a dead mod that fills a very niche role, and handguns can also perform better. And again, like, it's not weak, it's just disappointing. It's a lot of hassle for not a lot of gain. Alright, up next is the Spore Bloom, another shotgun. Have you guys found out that I love shotguns yet? Because I really do. Spore Bloom is a unique shotgun that has a large amount of pellets and sits on a single shell per clip, so it's all about that one big hit. Kind of like a sniper, but it does like 80% more damage than a sniper. While the spread on the Spore Bloom is outrageously large, it is actually very easy to manage the spread with things like the handling trait and the concoction that reduces spread. Spore Bloom does have a lot going for it, which does let it use a variety of setups, and because of its huge base damage, it kind of punches holes into anything regardless of what you're doing with it. And with the clip one, you're allowed to use the Slayer mutator, which provides you with additional damage, but more importantly, reload speed. Or you can run the Bandit mutator, which when active gives you a huge damage boost if you want to rely on the RNG. I know Bandit is bugged with things that do multiple hits like shotguns, so you can get extra procs out of it, but even without that, Spore Bloom and Bandit just does silly numbers. But also thanks to its clip size 1, Spore Bloom can take advantage of things like Hunter Shroud and Wormhole to amplifying those single hits even further. Compared to the base shotgun, Spore Bloom is better if you can get consistent Bandit procs, as the Bandit mutator basically skips a reload time for each activation, which boosts its DPS tremendously. Because really, that's Spore Bloom's only downside as far as the gun goes, it just has to reload after every single shot. And it's not even that slow, it's just that it adds up a lot when you're doing it every single shot. Now unfortunately, Spore Bloom is stuck with its mod, Spore Shot. The mod only costs 350 mod power, which is basically nothing, so you'll kind of always have it. It just shoots an explosive that causes enemies to be slowed while they're in the area for up to 7 seconds. And I'm not even going to say the mod's bad, because the slow is great for ad and trash clear, and it just stops elites dead in their tracks. And the mod costs next to nothing. What I don't like about it though, is that it still damages the player like in Remnant 1, and if you don't have kinship on, because why would you, it hurts a lot on Apocalypse, despite the fact that it only does 45 damage per second, which is basically negligible on enemies on Apocalypse. I would prefer just not deal any damage at all with a Cloud. And also, unlike Remnant 1, the slow that Spore Bloom has is just the standard slow, so it doesn't stack with other slows. Back in Remnant 1, you could stack freeze slows and spore shots, so you can get enemies to become really slow. It was a lot of fun. So anyway, I don't care for the mod, it's not bad, I just wish it was more user-friendly. Ultimately, I do have a soft spot for shotguns. I would love to put Spore Bloom in S tier, but it's definitely not quite that good. Spore Bloom deserves to be a high A tier weapon. In the right hands, it's an absolute beast though. And even in the wrong hands, I mean, it's still gonna blow your arms off. Getting close to the end, we now have Starkiller, and yeah, if you're unfamiliar with this gun, I don't really blame you. I really don't know what role this gun fills. On the standard gun side, the Starkiller is just weak enough that it typically needs 2 shots to kill trash enemies, meaning that it only really kills about 2 enemies per clip, which the Coach Gun, Huntsmaster, and Pulse Rifle all do equally or better. It has a moderately fast reload speed, so that's not really anything to dock it for, but shooting this gun feels super hollow, and it doesn't pack a punch like the Coach Gun. It deals about the same damage as the Huntsmaster, but with a smaller clip size, and it can't really clear multiple enemies like a Pulse Rifle can. It also doesn't have a free mod slot to boost its ammo in any ways, and because it has the fixed mod Black Hole, we gotta talk about it. Black Hole works just like it did in Remnant 1, where it just sucks in enemies and then deals damage to all enemies inside and distributes its damage. It's not bad, but unlike in Remnant 1, direct damage mods here are kind of lacking, so it's not to say that it's weak, because it definitely can clear trash mobs decently well, but it doesn't do much on like elites and does nothing for bosses. And ultimately, I'm just not a fan of it because a lot of the times when enemies are trying to run towards you out of the black hole, as soon as it stops to detonate, enemies get away from the blast radius and it just kind of fizzles, so I don't really like that. I'm just not a fan of the gun. It has the same flaws a lot of ranged weapons with fixed mods have, is just where you can't scale both the weapon and the gun to be useful at the same time, so half of it's going to be dead either way. I'm not going to linger on this one, not a fan. I'm dropping Starkiller all the way down to D tier because it's just pretty bad. Black Hole is okay, but it's literally only good at clearing trash. Everything else about it is pretty terrible. And then we have the Twisted Arbalist, the new Ricochet Rifle. I loved Ricochet Rifle in Remnant 1, especially on a Summoner build, because I could just fire and forget the disc and the minions would take care of the rest. Here in Remnant 2, we have some issues with it. First being that the ricochet rifle has a hard time of hitting enemies. It often just misses smaller enemies, fizzles on contact, and just doesn't deal damage, targets dead bodies, and other weird issues that just make it very inconsistent. While the ricochet rifle in Remnant 1 had similar issues, they feel much more prevalent here than in Remnant 1. The damage drop off with each bounce is also very significant, and it looks like you're losing about 20% damage loss per bounce, so by the 3rd and 4th hit you're dealing like 100 damage. And honestly, Enigma ends up just clearing groups of enemies far easier, which is a shame because it's a handgun. The Arbalist also has a fixed mod, which admittedly is super cool. Enemies marked by the Arbalist get swords called down on them and just stab into them. I have absolutely no problems with the mod and its concept. To me, it just has the same problem we've been hammering home for a long time now, and that is that the mod and gun scale entirely differently, so you really can't make both of them good. And right now, neither of them are all that good. The sword call is excellent for trash clear, and honestly, for like a mod power build, it goes kinda hard on the trash. But unfortunately, most handguns can do a similar job without the headache of constantly watching your discs not hit their targets. And because you have to mark enemies with the discs before you can use the mod, because the discs are kinda bad, then the mod is bad. So right now, Arbalist is kind of in a rough spot. I want to put it in D tier, but I think it has some decent uses that I'm going to keep it in C. But even without the bore bug, it's got so many inconsistencies with the mod and the disc hit registration, it's just too annoying to play, but I have hope for it in the future. And then we have the Widowmaker. I know we don't see very many sniper builds in Remnant 2, where they were so common in Remnant 1, but Widowmaker definitely holds up. The sniper functions exactly the same as it did, but it does have some nice buffs here in Remnant 2, including a 10% base crit chance, 120% weak spot modifier, and a fat 20% stagger bonus. Widowmaker hits hard, I'll never be able to hammer that home enough. And like the Spore Bloom, there's a lot of skills and interactions that work very well with it, except obviously at further range. Sidewinder in particular makes the sniper and sure shot swapping build very powerful for a brief amount of time. While Widowmaker's sustained DPS isn't anything to write home about, what makes this thing, as well as Spore Bloom, so powerful is the ability to one-tap most enemies, allowing for a more running and gunning style that lets you aim down sights less, because that can get you killed. Widowmaker can also definitely hang with the best builds around, but the main reason why it lost a lot of its limelight, I feel, is because the Slayer Mutator isn't providing that fat 30% multiplicative damage bonus for one-shot weapons like it did in Remnant 1. So that big scalable power isn't so readily available for the Widowmaker. Regardless though, it is a very powerful gun, but the swarms of enemies that we have in Remnant 2 kind of hinder its trash clear potential. It's great on bosses, but it's not really the best for trash clear. So I'm going to put this guy up in high A tier, because in some min-max builds, it's an absolute powerhouse. And then we have the Wrangler, the old hunting rifle. I've personally never been a fan of this gun for the sole reason that it reloads so dang slow. You really can't buff it to make it stronger, but with a smaller clip size, because then you'd basically just have Star Killer. So I really don't know what can be done about it. But the only time Wrangler feels good to use is when you have the Gunslinger Prime perk to bypass the reload from time to time, though Emma mods can do that too. And while the total damage per clip is competitive with a lot of weapons, the abysmal reload speed makes this gun just a hassle to use in a firefight and just turns me off every single time I use it. The recoil on it is also kind of rough when compared to things like the Huntsmaster, which performs a very similar role but hits harder and has a faster reload and has significantly less recoil. So I feel like the Huntsmaster is just a better gun than the Wrangler all around. The Wrangler has 10% base crit chance, which does make up for this slightly, but it's not winning me over. And because I don't think the Wrangler offers anything that the other DMR style weapons also do, I'm gonna have to put it in C tier, but it's not as bad as like the Arbalist and the crossbow, trust me. Last but certainly not leastly, we have the XM657 Bonesaw, the LMG for short. There's an unusual amount of hate for the LMG which I can't possibly fathom. This gun has nothing but pros attached to it, and literally the only thing that brings this thing down is the overheat mechanic, which is still very easy to play around. But that is like the limiter to prevent this gun from dominating the meta. The LMG is strong. It's stronger than the Typewriter and the Blackmaw in terms of DPS, and has a gigantic 150 clip size to keep shooting forever and ever and never have to stop, except to drop your heat here and there. It just mows down trash of enemies and keeps bullets flying through bosses. And once you pair it with like an ammo mod like corrosive rounds and that get you that free reload, you're golden. Plus, Hotshot on an LMG also just mows down enemies on pretty much all difficulties, but especially when you pair corrosion rounds and momentum with it, it just makes LMG a beast at direct damage. So with ammo mods, you can dump like 300 rounds without reloading, and there's a good chance you'll refill your mod again by the time you run out of ammo anyway. So despite it having a super slow reload speed, it's really easy to skip it entirely. Now regarding the heat, while you can run the microcompressor, I don't really recommend it because activating a mod will also take some time and drop your heat away, plus dodging and repositioning will give you plenty of downtime to drop your heat as well. And really the only time where you're going to be consistently firing and building up so much heat is against like the target dummy or some trash. Still though, if you're not paying attention, you can overheat, and that is the only downside to this gun. No one likes to hit that overheat animation. And because of that, we can't place it in S tier, so it has to sit in A tier. Okay, that was a lot to get through, and I'm sure some people have some disagreements here and there, that's okay, but I feel this to be pretty accurate. The big discrepancies here are in the long guns that mostly have fixed damage mods, since mods are kinda all out of whack right now with all the weird bugs with mod generation. So like the handgun video, we are going to revisit this in the future when we get some adjustments based on whatever new patch notes and information that we get. I am pleased with how most weapons perform, but I feel like there's a large bias towards weapons that can abuse corrosive rounds and crit multipliers such as momentum and supercharger. Mutators and mods play a huge part in a weapon's viability, so we may have to go look at those as well, because there appears to be only like a handful of good ones for both categories right now. But that's going to be a video for another day. So that's it for me. Thank you all for watching, and thank you to my Patreon members, much appreciated. If anyone wants to talk shop about Remnant or video games in general, feel free to join my Discord in the description below, but thanks and good luck out there, hunters.